and welcome to my channel. 2020 was a year to forget for any Porsche fan like myself. Let's take a look at that debacle. Like in the year before, the two main campaigns of the year, the 24-hour races at Le Mans and at the Nürburgring, were on two following weekends, with Le Mans being first. And oh well, what a farcical it was. The new 911 RSR19 were both super slow on the straights and very unreliable. Basically like the Honda engines in F1 until 2017. Seriously, that was very painful to watch. In the end they finished 5th and 6th in the Pro class, but in the combined GTE standings there were many AM cars ahead of them. Definitely a race to forget. Moving on to the Nürburgring. Unlike the RSR, the 911 GT3R has proven itself as an effective GT3 car. The expectations and the hype were huge. After all, Porsche was still bloodthirsty after the 2019 defeat at that race. By the way, I will talk about that race in a future video. It will also go down in history as a disaster. Anyway, Porsche were among the favorites for the 2020 Nürburgring campaign. However, Le Mans had one last surprise in store. As if the race itself was not bad enough, some team members of the Porsche factory team tested positive with that one famous virus after the race. So, as a safety measure, Porsche withdrew all personnel, including drivers, that wore pre-sent at Le Mans. This had huge implications. After all, most Porsche teams were factory supported. Now all of that factory support was gone for the race. Manthey Racing, which would have undoubtedly been a spearhead of the campaign, even had to withdraw completely, since it is pretty much the Porsche factory team that competes at the WEC and Le Mans. Some teams could gather a sufficient number of factory and other pro drivers that were simply lucky not to be pre-sent at Le Mans, but there still gaps in staff and personnel, essential to make the cars work at their best, that could not be replaced that easily. The main teams holding the Porsche flags high would be the Fricadilly team, KCMG and the Falcon team. With the lack of factory support, they would need a miracle to win, and a poor qualifying undermined that. And so I prepared myself for another disaster. Well, as the race started, the Porsches struggled at the beginning, but with consistency they started making up position. With the beginning of the night, the number 18 KCMG Porsche, driven by Dennis Olsen, Timo Bernhard, Georg Bergmeister and Earl Bamber, even found itself in the top 5. It really shows how desperate the situation was, when two already retired drivers like Bergmeister and Bernhard had to jump in. Before it could think about mounting an offensive on the top 3, the race was stopped by a red flag due to the heavy rain that would haunt the whole race. The race only resumed at the morning, which meant I could get some decent amount of sleep, which is rare. Anyways, after the race resumed, the number 18 could climb up to 3rd place for a short time. However, mistakes later on lead to the car dropping out of the top 10. The Fricadilly car number 31, driven by Michael Kern, Maxim Martin, Matt Jaminet and Lance David Arnold, was also doing pretty well and was in the top 10. However, one could see that the drivers were struggling in the ever-changing conditions, which was probably due to the car not being set up well for the rain. Almost certainly another consequence from the lack of factory support. At the end, they were the best finishing Porsche, at 7th. Considering the circumstances, this can be seen as a small success. Victory was never even in the cards anyways. I mean, they even finished ahead of the best of the Mercedes, which unlike the Porsches had their usual factory support. Still, not a race I would gladly remember.